Welcome back, everyone, to the Risk Intel podcast, powered by SRA Watchtower, where we share risk intelligence with experts from across the banking industry. I'm your host, Ed Vincent, CEO at SRA Watchtower. Hello, welcome back to the Risk Intel podcast. I am very excited to have back with me today Jeff Fink, the founder and CEO of Lumio Insights. Jeff, thanks for returning to the program.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Good to be back.
Jeff, right, as we talked about in our last session, right, you have spent a lot of time in this space around data and data management and data architecture, right, having done that right from the audit perspective, from having really and being inside banks to help them solve those problems, to then working as a service provider and a partner and working inside some of those large core services systems. And most recently, right, having founded Lumio, right, you are back at it, and this time really trying to, I think, as you said, right, help organizations realize the value of data as a strategic asset for their organization. So in our last session, we talked about how someone should think about getting out of the starting gate. We talked about data architecture and right the various components of data architecture. And really, right, that modern data platform concept, which you talked about. One of the concepts that you teased out a little bit as you talked about that modern data platform was the importance of complete, accurate, and organized data, which I think is really the lead into today's conversation about data governance. And certainly governance in banking requires very strict controls as well as adaptability. So let's start by talking a bit about those critical components of a successful data governance framework for a financial institution.
Yeah, sure. No, good question, Ed. And when I think about data governance and yes, we could probably have 10 different podcasts on this, Ed. We could drill into all kinds of details, but let's at least start kind of big picture here. Is I think about data governance, and we are really concerned with quality of data quality, the integrity of that data, and then thinking about access, and security, like who has access and what are they doing, and and then thinking about compliance and some of the things that we know that we're responsible and accountable for, and need to make sure that our data systems are in compliance, and that we've got an environment that yes does all of the great things that we know data can do, and how data can help with so many different areas, but if we don't have the framework, if we don't have those guardrails, it really can get off the track very quickly. And so when I think of components, the first thing that comes to mind for me is about data ownership. Who, and I'm going to talk about these as roles. I think in smaller organizations that typically these are probably going to be grouped together, that one person may be doing these multiple roles, or potentially even all of them, but in larger institutions this does get there's more brought to the table, and we'll talk about some of those things. But data ownership is that being responsible, data source by data source, of what I'm putting in or what I'm ingesting into this modern data platform. Who is responsible for deciding what should be brought in, and what user needs there are, and thinking about just that from a systems or from a data source perspective. And then I guess the second role that I would say is what we call the data steward. So stewardship of we've got someone who owns each data source, but then thinking about how's it being maintained, and how are we've already mentioned those words, quality and integrity, and that's very important. A data steward is a role that really is looking out for that, and not just, it's really across systems, like as it's coming into this platform, making sure the quality is there, and that as that comes together with data from other systems, that it does make sense, that it's consistent, and a lot of things to think about there. But those two roles are very important, I think, in thinking about data governance in a framework. um, and then I start to think about the process, and so having standards and policies in place, that really set the organization up for, okay, we know how to deal with these things, and we've thought through things like what's the data format, or naming conventions, thinking about storing of metadata, meaning describing the data elements or the actual data we're bringing in, making sure we understand its lineage, where did it come from, what transformations have happened along the way. So having policies that make sure that all of those things are documented, and that they ride along with the data, and we're keeping a nice strict control over what our data lake and what our data warehouse or data marts look like, and the quality of data that's in there. And even setting, I like also setting a definition for what we call valid data. So what does that mean? And again, depending on the system, that might mean something different. And so making sure, I know you opened with this, Ed. I love these three terms, complete, accurate, and organized. That's what we want to say when we're creating these definitions of what is valid data, within our organization, and making sure that it is complete, accurate, and organized, so that we can get as much value out of it as possible. And and then lastly, I'd say just, thinking about, I mentioned compliance, thinking about the regulatory aspect of all, financial institutions. So making sure that there's proper audit trails, logging, change management is big in a data governance framework, and and then how we share data. So making sure those policies are set up so that there is secure sharing of data. Anyone using this environment that's essentially this single source of truth, making sure we know who is accessing it, and what the purpose is, what they're using it for, and that we're actually keeping a log of that. And hopefully, when I say logs and audit trails, think of what can my tools, the technologies that we have in play here, a lot of them already have that built in, but not that it just happens in a vacuum and, oh yeah, I think it's there, but those are things that are being looked at, evaluated on a periodic basis, and making sure that any anomalies are looked at. And again, I think that's part of the standards and policies of making sure that those things are done on a routine basis, to make sure we have a secure environment, and we've got those guardrails in place.
Well, let's pick up on that the standards and policies piece for a second, because I think that, right, that's I'm wondering who would typically be involved in that conversation or decision or creation of those standards and policies, right? Where does that responsibility lie? Who takes ownership of that inside an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does, at least what I've seen, in practice or in the field, we do, see a lot of different flavors of that, of the who and how that's being created. But I think ideal situation is it's a very, that does come from the top, of making sure that leadership of the organization believes all the things that we're talking about, and really, wants to have a robust, data governance framework in place. And so there's, again, it takes a lot of different forms, but some kind of steering committee, some kind of data governance committee that is really setting the direction and the vision, for what are we going to do? What is our data strategy, one, and then how are we going to govern, the data that we do collect? And so I think, making sure leadership, has started that message and has empowered people to put these roles in place, for data owners, data stewards, and then, as you said, then kind of flowing down from that, standards and policies that've been approved, by this steering committee, so that they, one, have teeth to them, and that, the organization is really, thinking about how we make sure that, we're putting up these guardrails, or at least we've said, these things on paper, but we're actually doing them, and we're making sure that we're monitoring that we're doing those, and keeping a record
Right.
of that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so that struck me as you talked about, log and audit trails, right?
Yeah.
And that information is captured in many tools,
Yeah.
but it's not worth anything if you don't do anything with it, right? So if you don't have a process that governs, right, going in and reviewing it and looking for exceptions and making sure that you are getting eyes on it and evaluating it periodically, you're right. It's right. If it just sits there on the shelf, it's not helping anyone.
Yeah. No,
Jeff, you
couldn't agree more.
you talked about the compliance and the regulatory aspect, and one of the themes there is certainly undoubtedly is data retention. And so I would imagine, right, I want to ask a follow-up question about, right, really, when should people start thinking about data governance, and, right, how early, how soon, right? But before we kind of get to that, which is maybe how do you get into the game, I'm going to start at the other end, which is, all right, you've got all this data, you're retaining all this data, right? There are compliance parameters that you need to adhere to here, right? What are some of the best practices around managing, both kind of old data, sensitive data, right? What do you retain? How long, when do you no longer retain it? Because you've got to comply. You've also got this other competing faction of wanting to, extract valuable insights. So, right, those themes in conflict with each other at some points potentially?
Yeah, no, I really, when we think about, we mentioned standards and policies, data retention policies are a key piece to that. And I think, it starts with data classification, thinking about, our data is not just, we talked about that data platform in this data hub or central repository, and it's just, everything there, and it's all the same. Like, it's definitely not treated the same, these data elements. So when we talk about data classification, we're thinking about, personally identifiable information. So, PII with our customer data, is very sensitive, and needs to be treated differently than other pieces that may not be as sensitive if there's not PII. But account level data and those attributes of loans and deposits, financial transactions, whether it's to those customer accounts or to the general ledger. So classifying, the data that we're storing, and then having policies around how we treat that data. So PII, we might decide that we're going to mask that, a social security number. Of course, can go, very deep into, how that's done, and the tools that can help do that as well. But I'll just leave it at that for now. About data classification is important. When we talk about retention, I think about, retention is, the flip side of that is data deletion or purging. So to me, that's the important thing, is that we've got these automated processes that are ingesting data into the environment, and doing that on a routine basis. Most of the time it's daily, but it depends on the data source. So we're accumulating more and more data every day, but it's really about, how do we define those policies about what we're going to keep, as you asked about, Ed. And I really like the concept of, well, one, automated data deletion, based on our policies. So setting that up to make sure it happens, meaning let's not get to the end of the year and then say, oh yeah, let's kind of go through that. Let's have that, as an automated process that's running daily as well, or potentially even, on the weekend, for example. What we do, in Lumio, the products that we have, but really not specific to Lumio, thinking about, others in this category, that there's a concept of data snapshots. So meaning at the customer and account level, the data that's at those levels, we want to know what a customer looks like today, tomorrow, over time, because we want to. And that same with an account, an account balance over time, obviously, is something we want to trend. So we need to keep, those data points so that we can have that trended view of a given attribute, whether it's of a customer or an account. So there's pieces there that are required, and it makes really good sense to have them. But those other pieces, or thinking even in that line of a trend, maybe we don't need to be as granular, meaning as I get a month, 2 months, a year out, having daily snapshots of certain attributes, it just isn't needed anymore. And again, thinking about compliance, and we want to keep what is beneficial to us and what is strategic, but if it's not, then we shouldn't keep it. And so having that automated process that would have we call it a rolling set of snapshots, meaning on a daily basis. So if data is loading from these systems on a daily basis, for the current month, or maybe a 60 or 90-day period, daily snapshots do make sense at the customer and account level. But then again, after that, it doesn't. So there's a rolling period, meaning as new data comes in, a new day, a new week, then data's rolling off as well. But maybe on a week ending basis, it's not a 90 days, like weekend snapshots, we might want to keep for a year. So 52, 53 of those, or even more, to have those weekly snapshots if you need to do that kind of granular analysis. And then thinking about, well, month ends, most institutions are going to say, that's critical. We're not gonna delete those, and we have a lot of regulatory reasons to keep those as well. So those stay, but you've got some rolling nature to the daily data, and it's done on an automated process, so that you're adhering to those retention policies, and also that you're keeping the strategic data that you need, and those data elements that you don't are being automatically rolled off. And one last thing to say here is thinking of the concept. We've got this data warehouse, or these data marts that have that dimensional data, meaning structured in a way that's optimized for reporting and analysis. And that's what a lot of the reporting tools and some of the analytic capabilities are. They need data stored that way.
Right.
But again, as some of that data rolls off, that doesn't mean we've deleted it out of our data lake. If our policies state that you want to keep that. So there can be these different levels. Some people call it, hot storage and cold storage, or cool, a lot of different terms there. But just thinking about, we have an architecture that data can be stored, and it can be in different grains, and different retention policies, depending on which zone or which component of the architecture we're talking about.
Jeff, that last bit there really resonated, and it really reinforces the complexity of data retention, right? And it's not a simple concept, and it can be done really well there, and allow you to have that, the optimized, delivery of analytics and serving up of those insights, while also having very robust controls and processes around data retention. I'm going to ask you one final question to close here, which is, when should an organization start to think about data governance? When is it too early, or when is it too late, right? Right, because if folks are contemplating this, right, and they're wondering, have I missed the boat, or right, or is it too early? What advice would you give to folks on that?
Yeah, I mean, ideal situation, it comes first. If you think about it, let's build the guardrails, let's build the
Yeah,
foundation and then kind of build on top of it or start to populate it. But realistically, or in the field, like that probably isn't, that ideal situation doesn't happen because the institution has gotten started, and gotten started without that governance guardrails in place. So that's okay, right? They've already been operating that way. Let's put the framework in place with the environment that's in place so that we're now, feeling like we do have those guardrails in place with the data processing that we now and the architecture that we, currently have. But then hopefully that sets it up for that evolution or the scalability of we're going to keep adding to this over time, and we're going to feel better about what we're doing now in the short and long term because we have the framework in place. But we didn't have to throw out anything we were doing and kind of start over.
right.
So I think the answer is, at least in my opinion, that it's, yes, you'd love to have, the house built first and then, start moving into the house. But in practice, it just, you've got to really, just realize where you're at in the journey and then get started there and do it incrementally. I think is a fine approach, that it doesn't have to be a big bang approach. You're just getting started and then you're making it more robust over time.
Thanks, Jeff. So that's think that's reassuring, right, for folks who may be thinking, all right, uh, have I missed the mark, or should I start now? I think the answer is you should start now, even if you're not really ready for this until a little bit later, right? As you said, right? If you can build early, that's great. Otherwise, right, you accept this is where we are on the journey, and let's get into it now, because it will just benefit us the earlier on we get going with it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, makes a lot of sense. And thanks for the recap there. But yeah, I think it is just get started and know that, you've got some of the most strategic assets, of the organization, that and they should have, proper governance and a framework in place. Yeah.
Okay, I think that, Jeff, you began with this concept of complete, accurate, and organized data, and I think that's a great way to start thinking about data governance, right? We unpacked the different roles of the data owners and the data steward, all really with an eye towards quality, integrity, access, and compliance, and the importance of having robust processes in place to drive standards and policies, and right. One of those will be around data retention, right, where we dug into, right, in a fair bit of detail. And I think, though, that, right, if we bring it all the way back full circle here to the fact that if we really believe that data is truly the currency of the future, then data governance is going to become increasingly important to financial institutions. So, right, as you said, you are where you are in the journey, right? If you can start early, great. If not, you start where you are, because you know that building from here is only going to benefit you in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. No, makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a great way to sum it up. Yeah.
Jeff, thank you. Many of our listeners in this space operate in the risk arena, so would love to have you back for one more look at putting a point on how should organizations think about risk management as it relates to their data, right? We've talked about really architecture and governance and some of those building blocks, but the risk dimension is one I'd love to explore as well. So hopefully you'll come back and explore that with us. But thanks for today's session on data governance.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and can't wait to come back.